Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call a special council meeting to order to Thursday, August 27th, 2020. First off, are there any or disclosures of interest? Any disclosures of interest? Seeing none. First up, we have a resolution from a written delegation, correspondence from Ken and Lori Toonstra. Need a mover and seconder for the correspondence. Moved by Councillor Freg, second by Councillor Bothwell. Any discussion before I read the resolution? No. Moved by Councillor Freg, second by Councillor Bothwell. Resolved that the correspondence received from Ken and Lori Toonstra with reference to PA 20-18 settlement agreement, official plan and zoning amendment application for 21 and 23 Main Street and 6 Doran Avenue, Laneway ownership be received. All in favor?
Yes.
That's carried. Up next, number 4, report. PA 2018 settlement agreement, official plan and zoning amendment application for 21 and 23 Main Street East and 6 Doran Ave, Laneway ownership. Who's going to speak?
Yes.
Antonetta?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Jordan, members of council, and members of the public who are tuning in this evening. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Tonight, I'm reporting back to you on the items we were directed to look into by council at our next meeting, our last meeting, sorry. The exception to that is the green space, and you'll see that in the list of things I'm going to speak about today and say, well, we never talked about that. And I wanted to say is that came through me via an email, and I thought the more information and clarity we had around it, the better it would be for the collective discussion, and so we've included it in the presentation so that everyone can benefit from the conversation. In addition to that, I also wanted to publicly apologize to our clerk team because we did, after confirmation from both legal teams, include the laneway in the presentation this evening in our effort to both do what you instructed and do the right thing, and that is keep as much as possible in open this evening. So tonight I'll talk to you about, quickly go over the council direction. We'll talk about parking, units, balconies, green space, next steps, and as I said, a late edition of the laneway. So that will be the last slide, and unfortunately I'll look a little out of order, but I wanted to be authentic to the process and how that happened. So just for a reminder, this was the council direction that staff received. Resolve that confidential report 20-17 be referred back to staff to negotiate the intentions of what was discussed in closed session and bring back a settlement at a special council meeting on August 27, 2020. So here we are. Yes. Oh, there's my presentation. Apologies about that. Thank you. So after that, I want to talk about parking. There was a decrease in units from 90 to 87, and we'll talk about that, but because there's a decrease in units, there's a decrease in parking requirements. The total number of parking spaces is now fully compliant. The plan provides 159 parking spaces and 158 are required. We originally had 15 spaces for the commercial use. That's gone up to 28, which is an increase of 13 spaces. What I've included for you in this presentation is an excerpt from the plans showing exactly where the parking spaces are, and you'll see in that little chart on the top right sort of what's required, 158, and they're providing even an additional one on top of all of our requirements. So that's there for you. And then the settlement proposal authorizes the use of 16 tandem parking spaces for the apartment uses. I do want to say that each tandem spot will go only to one unit. So the tandem parking spaces will be used exclusively by the owner of one unit. It will not be shared. We don't want to cause any parking chaos, and there's assigned spaces. And then the other thing that we did is that the accessible spaces are AODA compliant to ensure that we're meeting accessibility targets. Then the number of units was another direction for staff. So as you know, we started at 92. We got down to 90 at our last meeting, and we are back with 87 units. I've also included an excerpt from the plans which shows how those 87 units are achieved, and do note that the building form remains unchanged. As I mentioned, the details of the design, the materials, all of that is dealt with the site plan approval process, and that's why that doesn't look any different right now. Next, we talked about some balcony concerns. So I just wanted to address those and provide any, sorry. Can I continue? Oh, okay, sure. So the balcony concerns, these are typically dealt with by the condo corporation. There are usually restrictions put in place in terms of what can and cannot be on balconies. Barbecues are not permitted through our fire bylaw. That is regulated here in the town of Grimsby. It's also important to note that this application will be providing bike garage and storage in the underground parking, so we don't anticipate any parking of bikes on the units. Oh, okay. And are you trying to throw me off my game tonight? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, making light of the situation. During the site plan process, we can consider making the balconies opaque if we are concerned about any visual clutter. I do want to say that there are some pros and cons to that in terms of how the massing will look, but that's something that we can deal with. I did also want to point out I included these photographs because I think during COVID, the need for balconies for human health, both social and physical, became abundantly apparent. And we're confident that we can mitigate any clutter on balconies, but we have to provide balconies for people. I think that's really important, and we wanted to say that. The next piece is this piece about green space, and as I said, we received an email about this and thought that everyone would benefit from the information. What you have here is an aerial of our downtown, and you can see there's not a lot of green space there. We don't have any requirements for green space in the downtown. In fact, it's highly uncommon. Even historically, it wouldn't have been included in the development. Parkland here is only taken where a park is currently planned. That is guided by our OP, our Parks and Rec Master Plan. The town in this instance gets cash in lieu of parkland through development charges. This application will require a cash payment in lieu of land dedication. The cash payment, it will be for the equivalent of 56% of the value of the land at the rate of 1 hectare per 500 dwelling units. That's approximately, so that's 56% of the land that's there. The amount that we receive is not based on the value today, but it is based on the value of the land before the building permit is issued. In addition to that, we're also working with the proponent on a rooftop garden, and this is voluntary. So hopefully that addresses any questions around green space. Next steps, I just wanted to outline very simply usually what happens in a site plan approval process. So this chart is a simple one. It outlines the general steps for this type of application. Charts like these are produced by the Association of Municipalities Ontario and other municipalities to help the public understand the general next steps. These are by any means an exhaustive list. So what happens is, should we approve the settlement agreement tonight, there will be a site plan submission, there'll be some reviews and review and refinements through that process, another report to council, and if approved, building plans are reviewed for Ontario Building Code compliance and a building permit is issued. And finally, as I indicated, we did add the same slide that we had last time here about the laneway and pedestrian safety. I'll go through very quickly what I said last time, which was that the laneway currently has no exit. We are improving the safety of the laneway for both pedestrians and vehicles. Laneway services the heritage buildings at the northeast corner of Ontario and Doran, and we are further improving it by obtaining a safe exit for the laneway onto Doran from the developer's property. The laneway is not lost, it's redirected to a location with a safe exit. So DeSantis will have ownership of the laneway during the construction of the building. This is done in the town's best interest with respect to any liability issues that may arise during construction. After that, the new and expanded laneway will come back to us and under the town's control once construction is complete. DeSantis shall maintain and repair the laneway. The public will be able to use the laneway once construction is complete. This agreement and component of the agreement is consistent with our recommendations, which called for the land to be exchanged and expanded through the easement, which in our opinion represents a significant public benefit. So that's the outline of the directions that you gave us, how we came back on them, what we were able to accomplish together, and furthermore, the additional 2 pieces about the green space, the balconies, that sort of thing. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. We do have Alan Ramsey, our planner here, John Doherty, our legal counsel, and are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonetta. Questions from council? Councillor Cadwell?
Okay, I'm on. All right. Yeah, thank you very much, Antonita, for the very good presentation and the hard work that you and staff put into the getting together again with the developer to the ask of council. I think just wanted to thank you for that. Just a comment and a couple questions. That property, and I had a little quick conversation with Mr. Basic. Just for those who maybe haven't been in town as long as some of us have, that property on Main Street has been vacant, I'm guessing probably from the mid-1990s to the late 1990s. Again, I have a little bit of history there. My father owned his office building, was part of that property. And so I'm really, I'm excited that something is coming, that we have a development coming to this property. Because again, that's been vacant for a lot of many years. And I was with some other councilors this morning, and we were just talking about a few things from another municipality. And it's really important that when you have vacant lands in your downtown, that nothing's been happening. So here we have an opportunity, which is great. And the question I do have is regarding setbacks. Am I getting a little bit of the cart before the horse here to ask the question? How setbacks are, again, I read was it 291 pages, and it's a lot of reading. So I just reading through it, I was wondering if I could get some clarifications on proposed setbacks. Are we at that stage right now? Or is that, I'm getting ahead of the...
I'll look to our legal counsel if you want to answer that. I think through you, Mr. Mayor, can you tell setbacks in respect to the heritage impact assessment, to the front facade of the building?
Yeah.
I just need a bit more clarification to be able to answer that.
I apologize. Setbacks in regards to where how the building's going to be designed and built to the existing building that's on the east side of Main Street. Any setbacks, that's just my concern.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
To do with the building.
yeah.
How it affects, is there any amendments being asked for, or any variances for setbacks?
So there aren't any amendments being asked from a setback perspective from side yards. But I wanted to say first part, the HIA did speak to the setbacks from Main Street and stepping the building back, and we have tried to do that to the best of our ability.
Okay.
And then from a side yard perspective, I'm happy to, if Walter wants to elaborate on anything. Do you want to add anything? No, so, I don't, unless there's something specific. So there's no exemptions to setbacks being asked for.
Okay, all right, that's great.
Correct.
Thank you, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Bothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan and Antonetta. Nice to see you. Thank you for your presentation. I just would, first of all, I have a number of questions. I hope I indulge your patience. The first one is that the presentation indicates that there are 16 tandem spaces. If you can flip to the diagram that shows the on level 1, there's actually 6 marked. On level 2, there are 9 marked. When I add 9 plus 6, I get 15, not 16. Is that correct? There's 15, not 16?
It's a little small. Oh. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a little small on my screen. I believe our agreement says 16. I'm not sure if there needs to be a minor update to the drawings. It's hard for me to see on the screen. I'll throw it over to Alan Ramsey, our planner, who looked at this in much more detail.
Because I did look at the further schematics that we've been provided for.
Sure.
A little bit clearer, the ones that are further in our documents, and I couldn't see a 16th space there. So yeah, I would like confirmation on where that, because that's technically 2 parking spots. How many bike spaces are in the bike corral is the next question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have the details of how many bike spaces are in the bike corral.
So based on the
Well, and I can throw it to Walter and see if he knows through the history of the application. Walter, do we have a sense of how many bike spaces are being provided? Or is that, we don't have that yet?
it's based on 0.3 per unit.
Yeah.
Is the requirement, and I'm just asking if they're meeting the requirement of 26 bike spaces.
There are no exceptions being requested, so they will have to provide whatever the zoning requires. And with respect to the tandem spaces, what we've identified in the zoning bylaw, the draft bylaw, is a maximum of 16, so they can provide no more than 16 tandem spaces. So they're allowed to provide less. The total number of parking spaces are proposed to be provided. They're not requesting any exceptions, but they're not allowed to provide more based on the draft bylaw. They're not allowed to provide more than 16 tandem spaces.
So if it helps, so they can provide less tandem spaces, but they'll still have to compensate for that in individual spaces. So there's no exemption to the amount of spaces being required, and we've capped the number of tandem spaces.
Then I would suggest that the presentation's incorrect in that it should say 15 are currently in the proposal we have in front of us.
So the presentation says it authorizes the use of 16 tandem spaces, which is correct per the settlement agreement. So.
Okay. I'm just concerned that if it says maximum of 16, we just have to be very, very accountable as to how each of those spaces, considering parking is such a key issue for us. And when I see these kind of discrepancies, it just kind of makes me, I went over the floor count of each parking space, and I want to make sure we're at the 159 that he's suggesting is going to be in there, and that means 2 spaces that are dedicated somewhere else, that's all. Right?
Yeah, I think point well taken. They are going to be fully compliant,
Okay.
so we will ensure that happens.
Okay.
Did you want to add anything else,
thank you.
Walter? No, I see Walter standing. I wanted to give him an opportunity to speak if you
Point
want
of
to.
clarification, I don't want there to be anything hanging
Yeah.
out there. There are still 159 parking spaces being proposed.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. That's great to hear. With respect to Councillor Cadwell's comment about the vacant property and that it's been vacant for some time, when I researched what kind of activity we've had on this property, going back to 2008, Dr. Joe, a local dentist, had put in an application that actually progressed right to site plan. It was for a 2-story on Main and a 3-story at the rear of Main. It was not using the laneway, and it was using parking on the Duran property. It was using both 6 Duran plus the frontage, but in a different way. And that site plan agreement and the looks of that building from a 2-story height of 10.5 meters, I think it was, included 12 residential units. That's reasonable. That would have been nice. Unfortunately, for some reason, he chose to move down the street and build his building elsewhere, and the property was subsequently sold to DeSantis in 2017. So, I mean, we have had opportunity to have others look at that property, and one's come very close to completion. Now, at that point, it was interesting because, again, the laneway was apparently town-owned, but that particular application did not choose to build over it or to absorb it in any way. So maybe even at that time, there was, you know, that whole thing would have been, had we cleaned it up at that time, we wouldn't be where we are today. But unfortunately, we're at the point today where the laneway is still not resolved, the title is not resolved. Building over something that you don't own would cause a bit of an issue to me. So I'm just concerned about that we haven't got to the point of actually dotting our I's and crossing our T's on ownership of that laneway as we're entering into these conversations about what the building should look like. Then the other thing that I came across was the increase in the commercial and restaurant GFA, and it's gone from 463 to 603 square meters. And in the little diagram there at the top, in very, very small print as well, it says that the retail or the service component is 3,455 square feet, and the restaurant component is 3,035 square feet. In meters, that's roughly 282 square meters for the restaurant. Now, the interesting part about that is when we talk about parking is based on the amount of gross public area for the restaurant use. And 1,000 square feet is being designated for dining area out of 3,035 square feet. So roughly 30%. Based on that, the parking that the applicant is proposing is 17 parking spaces. So that's at one space for every 4.5 square meters, and with the 80% factor for the downtown. Normally, a restaurant occupies the largest amount of it is your dining area to increase your customer base and your income and your revenue, and then the back part is your kitchen. So you'll find that in most cases you have a 60-40 split. 60% is your dining and 40% is your back end. So I'm a little confused how we're proposing only 1,000 square feet for the dining component, and I would say that that's potentially not accurate, and we should be looking at roughly 60%, so 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, almost double that for the dining area component of for the use, the type of use that's projected there. That would change the amount for dining to 169 square meters roughly at the 4.5 per unit would roughly work out to 30 spaces with the 80% reduction. So instead of 17, providing a dining area that would be more in line with other restaurants would require 30 spaces, whereas 17 is being proposed in this particular scenario. So that's a question I'm going to leave with staff to ask how we would look at a restaurant component of only 1,000 square feet for dining and 2,000 square feet for back end. It just doesn't make sense on that.
Do you want Alan Ramsey to address your question?
Yeah, that would be great if I can have that one addressed before I move on. Thank you.
So because they are being required to comply with the bylaw, if they come in with a restaurant larger than what they've assumed at 1,000 square feet of public restaurant space, then they needs to somehow comply with the parking requirements. So it's really a case of they have to prove to the town at the time of the application of the building permit that they comply with the bylaw. And that may be that they will have to have a restaurant that's consistent with what their plans say of 1,000 square feet of public restaurant floor area. It's, so, I mean, that's really, really, you know, the best we can say in terms of, because we're not giving them a reduction in parking, they have to comply with the bylaw. And therefore, when they bring that use forward, they have to demonstrate how that space and that parking satisfies the
yeah.
bylaw.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I can expand on Alan's point, if the restaurant came back as 2,000 square feet were for open dining space, then they would have to fully comply with the bylaw, right? If that was the public space at the 80%. So the onus is on them during site plan. If there's anything that isn't fully compliant, we have this proposed agreement which would force them to be compliant.
Or ground or space, put more spaces in. So if we don't do it now and we don't get it in this agreement at the beginning, they can't add it later. So the point is, they're saying they're going to have 3,455 of retail and commercial. They're going to have 3,035 square feet of restaurant, and I'm assuming that's one restaurant. If it's two, that might be different, but of that total amount of 3,035 square feet, restaurant, which is one parking space for every 4.5 square meters, it would make sense that we plan for the most and the highest use, which is what our zoning bylaw says as well, and provide in this agreement the maximum number of spaces for the maximum potential of restaurant use. And in which I'm saying is, if you're dedicating 3,035 square feet, it's going to be greater than 1,000 of dining area. It doesn't make sense. It's reversed to the use for the backroom kitchen.
I think we have answers to all those questions. Maybe I'll just start by saying, I think if they come back to us, there could be that they ended up selling less units than they thought, and the unit composition was bigger, and they could gain spaces that way. So at best, right now, it's a best guess how big the restaurant's going to be in there, if what type of units they might sell, how many units, even the units, they're all maximums because we have to build in some flexibility into the plan. We don't know what the market will look like. So I think just because there aren't all those parking spaces on there now, if they're needed, the onus is on the applicant to find a way to provide them. So if they have to go down another level, I'd say that's on them. Like, we can't sort of how can I say best to describe it, have everything figured out right now to a T without leaving any room for the market to dictate what might happen here in terms of units. I don't know, Walter, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. If the uses within the building that's being proposed when we review the site plans require 13 additional spaces, then the applicant will be required to provide an additional 13 spaces. So that's the agreement we're recommending that the town enter into with the applicant, that they meet the zoning requirement for parking, regardless of what it is. At this stage, it's 159. It could be more. They may not need to provide as much. So if they significantly reduce the number of units in the final scheme of things, then they wouldn't have to provide as many parking spaces.
Maybe I'm just confused, because from what I'm understanding, once we finalize this agreement today or whenever, the OPA and the ZBA are finalized, and in it, it has the parking reductions. We can't go back and say to him, oh, your parking reduction isn't good now, your ZBA. We want to change that. We're locked in to whatever comes out of that agreement, is what I understand. Is that not correct?
So if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's that they have to be fully compliant. So we're not locked into any numbers. If the restaurant is more, then they have to provide more. They have to be fully compliant. So I don't see sort of the vulnerability to the town. I think we did everything to safeguard the town to ensure that we have the number of units required based on the amount of units that end up selling, the amount of restaurant, open space that ends up being there. Walter, if you can add anything to further clarify, I welcome it, because I think it's best that we just have open
Draft bylaw
discussion.
isn't a flat number. It's having to comply with the ratios that are in the parent bylaw. More units require more parking. More commercial floor space requires more parking. Less units requires less parking. So it'll be determined at the time the site plan is done. But they will have to be compliant with the standard bylaw provisions in the zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Almost last question. The parking also looks like it's, there's no dedicated, and this came up at our last conversation with Mr. Basic as well, where the town's commercial and restaurant spaces that we're asking for are inside that building, and they're not dedicated, and that it's mixed in with the visitors' 50 spaces on the first level. My concern is just that if we don't dedicate them, and I'm understanding in, I think, your presentation that we leave some of this to the condo board. I was on a condo board. I know what it's like when you have parking problems, and I don't think it's fair of the town to burden the condo board with the costs and the oversight and the headaches of trying to manage the town's public parking within this building. Our 28 spaces that are not going to be marked and not going to be dedicated and are going to be part of the whole free-for-all on the first floor. And I think that leaving that problem with the condo board is not the right decision to do. And I think it is really critical that if we're, as a town, expecting public parking, that it is dedicated, it is agreed to, it is marked, and it is our parking. So I'm really concerned about that as well. You want to speak to that?
That's something we can require through the site plan agreement when it comes forward, and we can include provisions in the site plan agreement that the spaces be marked in any way we deem appropriate, obviously with the agreement of the developer.
Yeah, we can do that. We're still within a condo building, and we're still probably going to have issues with enforcement and who's going to be able to enforce. So I'm just saying this is going to be unique in the sense that we'll be having to deal with who's going to do that enforcement and how we're going to word that as we move forward. So, yeah, you're going to need to have a mic real close to you because we're going to have you popping up and down like a jumping jack. The disposition of the laneway, so again, that was my concern, is that the laneway title is a critical piece of this building, and then we have our own rules to follow with respect to the disposition of the laneway and how it's valued and the public process that we undertake in order to dispose of any property. And I think it's really important that we follow those processes we have in place, that we ensure that it's open and transparent as to what we're requesting as to valuation for that laneway. If we do end up we get full title, and then we want to say, okay, this portion of it is we will sell. That process is mandated by us, and I think it needs to be open and transparent and in the public realm as well, how we do that. I think I'm pretty well done.
Is there a question you want us to answer about the laneway? I want to ensure we answer all questions to the ability that we can tonight.
So with respect to the legal title, and we're still, as I understand, in front of the Superior Court with documents, or I don't know what stage we are with that. There was a May meeting, and I'm not sure how far along we've progressed since that. Mm-hmm. But potentially, how long are we looking at waiting for the Superior Court decision? And with respect to any agreement that we may come to, how we're bound by whatever's going to come out of this. So it's just really critical that we understand what those easements and what those rights are and what those access arrangements. You mentioned the construction access, where we're not permitted to use the laneway while it's under construction. And of course, we know there's a whole bunch of other language within that agreement and different types of ifs this happens and when that happens, then this will happen and that will happen. And there's a couple other dates that might be critical in there as to if something doesn't happen by a certain date, then it's all for naught. So is there any potential, what's the risk to the town that we may or may not get title to the laneway? And I think we really, really need to understand what that risk is, and how many, have we got a number of other influences to it other than just this proposal that's in front of us as to that decision on the laneway. So I just look at other parcels in town. I look at the Casablanca interchange parcel that everyone thought the town owned, and the town didn't own it, and the Ministry of Transportation still owned it, and the region had to then do some paperwork to get it transferred over to them, and then it has to come back to us, and then we have to go and get title on it. And everybody thought when the Grimsby secondary plan was going that we all owned it. So I really think we need to know what the risk is on this moving forward, and what the risk is to the town, and what the risk is on the potential that should we decide to allow the building over it, is there any potential that we could end up not having continued access? Thank you.
I absolutely agree with the comments. We will address those in closed with our legal counsel.
Thank you. Councillor Vardy? All right, you'll be next.
Hi, Antonetta. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've got a few questions and comments. I guess what comes to mind, you know, when I think about tandem parking spots, gee, honey, can you go down to the sub-basement and move your car so I can get my car out? Like, nobody wants that. And we all know what's going to happen. They're going to park in one of those commercial spaces because it's an absolute inconvenience. That's why when people only have one parking spot or they can fit 2 cars in their driveway, they usually put one on the road. So I have a big problem with tandem parking spaces. To my mind, you know, they're as good as one spot because they're not really efficient. Balconies on Main Street. I appreciate that everybody should have a balcony, but I've got safety concerns about balconies on Main Street, of things flying over the balcony and hitting people on the street. So that's a concern of mine, especially when we don't have much of a setback at all. That basically the building is coming up fairly close to the sidewalk. We established this August 31 deadline back in January, so prior to COVID. And then we run into COVID and kind of the world stops and then turns on its head. And, you know, for 4 months, kind of even, you know, with a lot of uncertainty continuing now. So I don't think I feel very uncomfortable with the August 31 sort of deadline to resolve this. I think we're feeling pressured into doing something that we just should not do just yet. You talk about you've authorized up to 16 tandem spaces. Does that mean they can come back with less? It means they can come back with less if it's up to? Because you said we've authorized this many, so it means we've allowed for this many.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you have to take that many.
Correct. If there is a change to the amount of units, we can even get less tandem parking spots and more individual parking spots. I would think that works sort of in favor of the first comment that you made about not liking the tandem spots.
Yeah, well, I don't. To my mind, they're useless. So however many there are, they're as good as one spot. They don't really count for 2. When we talk about, well, what the comment here is, I've heard you often say, well, he'll decide later kind of what the market will bear, what he'll do, and that'll affect parking and blah, blah, blah. Well, my understanding is you plan, then you execute. So I don't think that developers are that cavalier, like, oh, you know, we'll put up a box and see how we chop it up later. I think, and you may not be aware because you're new, that there's a whole, the residents in this community have strong feelings about what goes there. So the residents in this community have what you can call skin in the game because it's their downtown, it's where they live. So in terms of what they want to see, and they don't want more parking problems because they've already got parking problems. So when we talk about this particular property, there's a lot of issues with it, and that's why it's received so much public attention. It isn't just a, yeah, we love it, great, put it up. It's like, yeah, but, and what about parking? What about the laneway? What about balconies? What about this? What about that? So like there's so many unanswered questions that I think we really need to have these things ironed out. Like before we kind of say yes to something and then find out it's going to go in a slightly other direction, but you kind of committed to this in principle, so you're sort of stuck with it. I'm really uneasy with that. You know, I've heard comments at the last meeting about, you know, we're so lucky to have a developer who wants to come spend $50 million. I'm sure if Mr. DeSantis put that up for sale, he'd find a buyer. Because Grimsby is a town on its way up. Our property values are going up. We are a beautiful town. You know, our average income in this town is, you know, quite high, relatively speaking. So this is a place people want to come. And, you know, I don't know why the Dr. Joe proposal was refused, but it would have been a lot more in line with what the community would have wanted to see. Some of the sort of comments I've heard about the restaurants, just sort of, you know, from Alan here, that it's only going to be sort of 1/3 public, 2/3 other, because that's all the parking they could put in. What restaurateur is going to move in with only 1/3 of the public space he could use? That's just doomed to fail. So then we'll get some other kind of problem once again, because we haven't addressed some of the fundamentals at the beginning. So I keep coming back to this. Like we need to get back to the basics. You know, I've given this a lot of thought. We need to get back to the basics on laneway ownership. That is going to help guide us, I think, through a lot of this kind of quagmire that we have. And I have to say, I mean, you know, in listening to you, you give this as like, you know, you're enthusiastic. It's kind of a sales pitch. And a couple times I've heard you say we, as in, you know, you and the developer. And that makes me uncomfortable. Like when you make those kinds of references, because when I say we, it's the residents of Grimsby. That's what I'm concerned about. And bringing something to Grimsby and working with developers, that's going to be something the residents of Grimsby want to be with, or, you know, to have in our town. And I just want you to understand a little bit of the history and why I'm coming at this the way I do, and why it's like we've lived through some other cautionary tales. Winston Road, we know we don't have enough parking down there. It's one of the reasons why we have it. We've got empty retail space, because who wants to come if you can't park? They didn't build things high enough for restaurants, so they can only put in kind of quick food. So, I mean, let's not repeat our mistakes. And this is not to say there's not a lot of really positive about Winston Road, because there is a lot of positive about that. But we let some things go. We said, oh, it won't be a problem, we'll worry about it later. And now we're stuck with those problems, and there's no space to fix them. So I just want to leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I didn't hear any specific questions, but I will tackle just a few things if I may. When I say we, I refer to the team that you have assembled to work on this. I'm in week 4. I cannot say I, because I can't take credit for so much of this hard work that's gone into this. So if you see my emails, I was the team, we, this is not mine to own, and it's not a we as in them and us. It's we, your team, your staff, the people that we've employed and brought in to help us evaluate this application. So I think,
So I'm just going to say, you're the director now, so it's you, right? Like, that's what comes with the leadership role.
Yes, and as a leader, I would never take credit for my colleagues' work and the contributions of our legal team, of our external planners. I think as a leader, it's important to acknowledge it's a collective effort from anybody in the clerk's office helping to assemble these meetings to anybody who's involved. That's work in a sort of very collaborative way. So when I say we did this, I can't take credit for the previous reports or any of the work that's gone into this. Yes, and this is the direction that, you know, I think is good planning, and I've said that. Yeah, and then I'd like to say the number of units, you said, you know, that 87 is a max. The number of units can only go down unless I'm mistaken. From what I've understood, that's our goal, right? Set a maximum, and then if the composition changes, it can only go down. It can never be higher than 87. So we've done what we can to safeguard the town, saying it won't be higher than 87. If it changes.
We've never talked about it in maximums. We've talked about them in sort of finite numbers.
No. Sorry.
Not my understanding, sorry. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I always understood it to be a finite number.
So that, to the best of our understanding, I'm looking at Walter, it is not a finite number. We can't the developer has to go to market, sell the units. If more people want 2-bedroom units, the number of units will actually come down, but it can't go higher than 87. That's how you process sort of development applications when we don't know exactly what's going to sell. We can make a best guess, but we put a cap, and that way we feel safe about that. And if like I said, if more 2 units sell because that's what the market wants, then we'll actually have lower number of units in the building, which again, I understand to be something desirable from this council. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there anything more?
I didn't ascertain a specific question. I just wanted to address something, but if there's a specific question, happy to answer anything that we can.
Anything you said?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Vane?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, to Antoinetta and the planning staff, I want to thank you for work well done as a team. Antoinetta, I know that you're new to this and you're deferring a lot to Walter in that, and I appreciate that. Walter has been very involved in this. I'm a little confused why some of the previous speakers are making up stuff to kind of throw confusion in here. I'm a little confused by things like, well, I think the restaurant should be, and I think the parking is, and I don't like that. That's not really factual to the situation as I'm concerned. Like tonight, for example, there was just a comment recently made by another councillor that, well, lots of people want to come and buy in Grimsby. Well, actually, it's funny. I had a conversation with several people today, and I don't know why today everybody decided to phone me, but including a major developer who's actually already built in this town and continues to plan on building in this town. And he made it very clear to me, developers don't want anything to do with Grimsby right now because the council will not work with them. That's their words, not mine. So I'm a little concerned about that. Also, there's some talk about condo boards and them having to manage things. That's not a town issue. That's a private issue. Those of us that live in condo situations, I've been on the condo board. I was on the first president on the condo board in my development for 5 years. I know the issues we had to deal with, but that's private. That's not to do with the town. As far as parking, as I have said, and many, many other people in town have said, in the years that we've lived here, and I spoke to one person today who's lived here 35 years, and they have never, ever had a problem finding a parking space in downtown. I've been to all the different events and all the farmers market. I've never had a problem finding parking. He's now met the number of parking spaces that we want. Whether we like how they've done it or not is irrelevant. The facts is that he has done it. So I think what we need to do is stop making assumptions. We need to go on the facts that are being presented by the planning staff, including the planner that Councillor Bothwell recommended. They all recommend this. They all say this is good. We have businesses that are dying for this. We have people that want to move downtown so that they can be within walking distance of the grocery store, the restaurants, and all the different businesses. And yet all we're doing is trying to throw up delays and trying to create crises here, and I'm a little concerned by that. I think this is a good development. This is the developer himself. We've got to put our personal biases aside. The developer himself has bent over backwards. So I really think we need to accept this. And as the planning staff, the trained planning staff have said, a lot of this stuff will be dealt with in site plan. We've got to stop second guessing and thinking we know better than the experts. So that's just my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any more questions? Any further questions? Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks again for all the hard work that the team put forward and came back with the developer now meeting the requirements for the bylaw for parking. Again, that was one of the major concerns that I heard from a lot of people. I said it last time, and I'll say it again today, that a $50 development, we were looking at losing this development over 10 parking spaces. So I'm glad to see you guys being able to go back to the table to negotiate a settlement of this magnitude and now meet the requirements, which is, again, thank you very much. I think it's much appreciated. But again, when I sit here and I listen, last week we talked about 10 parking spaces. Now we're talking about balconies, and now and then we start talking about you know, different spots. And everybody teach their own when it comes to parking spaces, even in a tandem spot. I know with my wife, whatever car's there, we take. They're both our cars, you know? So swapping back and forth is not a big issue for me. And not just that, when people purchase those spots, maybe they only have one car and they get that spot because they have a 2-bedroom, or whatever the case may be. Sounds like these parking spaces are going to be assigned or somewhat to that magnitude. So the people that want that kind of parking are going to pay for that kind of parking. If they don't want that kind of parking, they're not going to take it or pay for it, whatever it is. So again, I think it's fantastic. I'll give some credit to my fellow Councillor Sharp, for pushing for the parking. You did that a lot. And again, like I said, I think it's going to be great for the downtown. Again, I said it last time, we have hundreds of businesses in this municipality that's looking for this development. And I think not moving forward with this, it would be a mistake on our behalf. Again, and I've always understood it, that this is a maximum. If they sell more 2-bedroom condo units, then it'll be less. And that's why you look at even the restaurant, it's 1,000. They have to meet the bylaw according to the agreement. If they sell less units, there's more parking spaces available, and they can expand maybe. That's how it goes when you're developing. You know, if you knew the numbers, these units would be pre-sold already, and we would know specifics. But nothing. The market dictates the number of units. So again, thanks to the team. Thanks for all the hard work. I appreciate it, and I like to see this move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Sharp?
Thanks, Mayor Jordan. So first, I have a question with regard to those tandem parking spaces. First, I'm going to tell a little story about tandem parking. Before I bought my house in Grimsby, my wife and I briefly lived in Burlington in an apartment for about 8 months after college, and they didn't have a lot of parking. It was owned by CLV Group. It was on Guelph Line, but there were parking problems. You had to pay for spots. So you rented a place and then you paid for a spot on top of that. And then me and my wife both have a car and we both have jobs, so we have to go to them. And they didn't have enough spots for us. And then luck came that they had a tandem spot. So my wife and I rented a tandem spot for a little less than twice the amount of one single spot. And but we could fit both our cars in there. But my wife was a supply teacher at the time, and she would leave a little earlier than me, and she would get home a little earlier than I did. And so she'd park her car, and then I'd get home and I'd park my car, And then in the morning, when we were in our routine to get out, I would have to go down and move my car out, and she could back her car out and leave to go to whichever school she was teaching at the time. And then I'd pull my car back in and I'd go back upstairs through the elevator, and that was the routine that we had to do. I mean, we could have switched cars, I suppose, right? But like, my wife and I, we kind of drive our own vehicles, right? I keep my glasses in the car, and I have a mask that I've been using for months, and it's in my car, not my wife's car. So we might not want to share some of those things. And so anyways, the tandem parking was not necessarily ideal, even though it was assigned to two people that lived in the same spot. And we have the same problems with townhouses here on Magnolia, and some of them are on Gage, and other areas around Grimsby. We have one driveway parking spot and one garage parking spot, and they're essentially a tandem spot. You can't get in or out of the garage, if you can even fit your car in the garage, with all the garbage cans and bicycles and baby strollers that we store in our garage. But so these people end up parking on the street, and now I have residents who call me and say, hey, we'd like to change the parking to only one side of the street, 1st to 15th of the month, and other side of the street, 15th to 30th of the month. And I send it over to staff in Public Works. None of them are here. And they always tell me, nothing we can do, nothing we can do, nothing we can do. And later, this is going to be if this becomes a problem. I'm not specifically talking about the tandem spots, but if parking becomes a problem, residents are going to contact me, and I'm going to forward it to, I presume, one of you in staff, and I expect the answer is going to be, there's nothing we can do. And then I'm going to get back to the residents who depend on me right now in the planning process to make sure that this will be a workable and livable building. And I'm going to have to get back to them and say, sorry, I didn't do my diligence when I could, and now there's nothing I can do. Right? And it's unfortunate how often people call me or email me more than call and say, I want something done about this. And we have to say, there's nothing we can do. I mean, we could have changed it before they built the home. We could have changed it before this building was built. We could have, and now that, for example, on Gage, we can't switch it to one side, one half of the month, one side, the other half of the month, because people depend on those spots for parking, for visitors and residents, and specifically residents because of the way that they park behind their garage. But we're at the point right now where we can control this. And one of the things that I hear all the time is that planning staff says, we'll require this through site plan, or we can require this through site plan. And my question is, will you? I mean, because after that, when it comes to site plan, you guys are here 9 to 5 or 7 to 4 or whatever time you're here during the day. I'm not here. My colleagues are not here. And staff will say, okay, we'll require, and it's like, I don't know what they will or won't require.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if that's a question, but I will say the site plan and the report has to come back to council. So you will have an opportunity to see everything that's in there, and you have an opportunity as a council to vote for it or against it. So it's part of the process.
But so then we get into the process, another 2 or 3 degrees into this process, and the ball is now moving, and like maybe there's some building starting, or there's at least more planning starting, and then they say, for example, with the restaurant, they say, well, the restaurant's actually a little bigger than we expected. And it's like, well, we'll have to require, and then they'll say, maybe we can't, or like, we'll say, well, maybe they'll reduce the number. It's like there's a lot of maybes and a stuff that is not necessarily, so we could set a plan, we could say, this is what you're allowed, and we could be safe. And my colleague, Councillor Bothwell, said that we should plan for the most stringent requirement, so that, I mean, you should always plan for the worst case scenario, and if there's some better case scenario, then we have a few extra parking spaces. No one complains there's too much parking.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, as we've stated, if the restaurant ends up being bigger, they still need to be fully compliant with the bylaw, so they will need to provide more parking spaces for the restaurant.
I understand that, and one of the things, hypothetical that I would go through in my head, and I think, okay, so I presume that this restaurant or this space will be sold. Someone will purchase it from the developer. And I don't know if there'll be a tenant. I mean, I suppose they could be a tenant, or they could buy it. And say the first occupant comes in and says, hey, we will use it. Well, 76 square meters is actually only 823 square feet. It's not 1,000 square feet. And so of this 3,034 square foot space, there's 823 square feet of commercial. I gave my colleagues here, I printed off the plan of the parking, and I highlighted in yellow what 823 square feet looks like. And it's small, it's less than a third. It's actually like 27% of that restaurant is front of house space, and 73% of that restaurant is back of house. Kitchen, storage, so you got 850 square feet. I mean, this room is not much bigger than 850 square feet. And so then the first owner maybe says, all right, I can do this. This will be fun. And maybe they don't succeed. Maybe they have to give up their tenancy, or maybe they have to sell the business. And then the next owner comes in and says, I have a plan, and I'm going to make this work, right? And like, they say, but I'm going to do some renovations. We're going to make this space more usable. And like, they want to increase that space. And we say, sorry, you can't if you don't have more parking. And then they say, okay, and they back out. And we have a vacant unit that'll sit there. And then the next owner comes, the next potential owner or tenant comes and says, I want to use this restaurant. But like, they have a plan. They want to make a certain amount of space. They want to make a viable restaurant space. I mean, it's 3,000 square feet. And they say, well, we'd like to use a little more than 850 for the public. And it's like, well, you have to increase, and then you just can't. You can't make new parking out of thin air. And so maybe this place will be either under-occupied or not occupied. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see another downtown. I don't want to see a building downtown that's just got a sign or covered in cardboard on the windows. And that can be a problem. And this is something that during the planning process, we have to do our due diligence, and we have to make sure. I want to be sure. And it seems like, so I feel like that it wasn't really clearly expressed to us at the last meeting that this restaurant, I pointed out that there's 603 square meters, and we're only accounting for 300 square meters in the parking calculations. But it wasn't really explicitly said that this restaurant is 282 square meters, and we're only going to allow them to use 76 square meters of that for front of house restaurant space. And like, so here I am at the last meeting saying, we have to meet these 10 space deficiency, right? And it looks like we have more like an 18 space deficiency or a 22 space deficiency. I don't know all the math, and I depend on staff to tell me that, right? Because, I work a full-time job. I'm a part-time counselor. I have a family and an infant at home. I come to these meetings. I'm not here 40 hours a week, and so I need staff to be explicit. When I make my decisions, for me to make an informed decision on behalf of the people that I represent, I need staff to give me all the information here in a few hours, or in the agenda, or in a report. And then, so on my own accord, I went home and I did the math, and some of my colleagues have also, and I'm like, wow, they're only allowing for 823 square feet of restaurant in this 3,000 square foot commercial space. And I come back and I'm like, hey, that seems like, something worth mentioning to the people who are making the decision. And I want to be crystal clear that this decision that we're making it's not about the planning merits of this. It's about sale of a laneway, right? It's about sale of a piece of property that's owned by the town, and this project is not even possible without us selling that. So I have to consider, do the people that I represent here in Grimsby, do they want me to sell the laneway? A. And then B, do they want me to sell a laneway that will result in this 4-story, 90 or 87 unit building? And so I'm not considering the others. And I know that's not much of a question, but I do have one last. When we talk about those 16 tandem parking spaces, is that 32 cars, or is that 8 spaces, 16 cars?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, 32.
So 32 of those units will have to take Well, 16 units will have to take 2 spaces, and
Correct.
so then, what do we have, 87 minus 16. So it just seems like, so what if people buy the single spots first? All right, so there's only, so if we take away from like 87 times 1.25, 109 spaces, minus 32 spots, which are double spots, there's only 76 spots. So what if a few of those units buy single spots, but 2 of them, right? And so then those single spots, I think, will be more valuable than the double tandem spots. And I think that people might buy a 2-bedroom and buy 2 single spots, and then what you'll be left with, what if, at the end, what if we sell out of all our single spots, and we're left with 32 tandem spots and more than 16 units? Then we have to sell a tandem spot to 2 units. It's like there's no way around that. And that's a possibility. That's something that could happen. And how are we going to prevent that? If I bought a 2-bedroom, I would much prefer 2 single spots to purchase than 1 tandem spot. And I think that some of the people who can afford a 2-bedroom in this building might also prefer that. And what if those single spots sell out and we're left with 32 spots, tandem, and we still have 20 units left, right? How are we going to sell them to 1 unit only without leaving some units without any parking?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can call Alan, who has looked at the parking calculations for us, to answer the councillor's questions. I'm doing 159 spots in total, minus 32 leaves us with 127 spots after the tandem spots in total. But I mean, Alan, do you want to offer anything further for clarity, for insight? I think, we've hired someone to help us look at this, so I want your questions answered, and if Alan can provide some insight into the math on that, it would be helpful.
Sorry, my question was rhetorical.
Oh.
If people buy out those single unit spaces, there is a possibility that we'll be left with more units than we are spaces, and that we would require to sell tandem spaces separately to different units, and I don't see how that can happen, but there's going to be approximately 76 single spaces for residential and 32. 76 plus 32 equals 108. That'll actually be 9. So there might be 77 single spaces for residential occupants, and then there'll be 32 tandem spaces, total of 16 tandem parking spots. So 77 plus 16 equals 93 individual spaces, right? So if we have some of these 2-bedroom, or even some of the 1-bedrooms plus den that purchase 2 spots, but 2 single spots and not 1 tandem spot, then it could put us in the pickle where we're like, wow, we have X amount of spots left, but they're only tandem spots, and we can't sell them to you because, and like I said, the question is rhetorical. I know the answer. The answer is yes, this can happen, and we should be careful.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, the tandem spots are going to be assigned. They're not going to be up for sale. So it's if you buy this unit, then you get these spots. So I think that alleviates the questions and the concerns. I mean, the developer doesn't want that either, right? They want their sort of client to have a good experience as well, right? But they will be assigned to a unit, so they won't be just up for random sale, which I think will address your concerns.
Those 16 tandem spots, which is essentially 32 spots,
Yeah.
will be, so 32 of those spots will be assigned to 16 units.
Yeah.
Well, I presume those will be the 2 bedrooms, but, so what is there, 1/3 2 bedrooms? So we're talking 87 times 0.33. There's 28 2 bedrooms, so most of those 2 bedrooms, they're gonna have to buy a tandem spot. They aren't gonna have a choice unless they buy 3 spots, a tandem spot plus a single spot. Or are the single spots also going to be assigned?
Yeah. Alan would like to chime in as well as Walter.
The the parking standard is 1.25 spaces per unit. So that means that if each unit gets a space, then there's a quarter of a space that contributes to extra parking pool, right? So from that, some of those extra spaces are going to be tandem, and some are going to be single spaces by themselves. So there's going to be, I think 22 spaces in that pool, and 16 of them are going to be tandem. So it's likely that someone's going to buy 2 separate parking spaces, or they can buy a tandem space, or they can buy 1 space, or in some cases, they may not buy any spaces. So all that is subject to what happens when the building's being sold, or so there's a lot of uncertainty. But in my experience, the town has a fairly generous parking rate, and to me that gives me confidence that because of that rate, there shouldn't be a problem. I shouldn't say shouldn't.
Alan, I'm sorry to interrupt. There may be people at home who are watching and they might not be able to hear you. If I could ask you to repeat your answer into the microphone, please.
Sure. So because of the parking rate at 1.25 spaces per unit plus guest parking, that means that there's going to be, if each unit gets a space, there's going to be extra spaces available in the pool, and that's 22 spaces. And if the town permits 16 of those to be tandem, that leaves 8 units, 8 spaces that would be, 6 spaces. Thanks for that. So it's possible when these units are sold that someone, or rented, that someone will buy a single space. They could buy 2 single spaces because there is capacity there for that, or they could buy a tandem space. So a tandem space being 1 space plus the space behind. So there is some flexibility in what the bylaw permits. And I was saying, with because the town standard is reasonably generous, that this type of standard, in my professional opinion, shouldn't create a parking problem for the residents.
Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Sharp's still speaking.
Sorry, thanks, Randy. I just have a couple quick more things. So what I get is a bit of doublespeak here, because on one side we said that those tandem spaces will be assigned to specific units, and then our other planner says that a person can either buy a single space, 2 single spaces, or a tandem space. And so that my original argument was that people in the 2-bedroom units would prefer 2 single spaces over 1 tandem space. And then you counter that to say, no, the tandem spaces will be assigned to those units. And then Ramsey comes up and says, well, you could buy some of these. And then, so 1 unit per space plus 6 additional spaces. So if you get 6 2-bedroom units that buy the tandem, or that buy 2 spaces, not 1 tandem space, then we end up with in a bogey for the number of spaces, a number of units we have compared to the number of spaces. And I mean, these things they're small, and I'm not arguing about the residential capacity for spaces, but I am pointing out that these tandem spaces can make it more difficult. And then what one of my colleagues mentioned is that if you own a tandem space and there is 50 commercial spaces, 28 commercial spaces upstairs, that maybe those people would park there. And when I lived at that apartment briefly before I bought my house here, there was people would park and you would sometimes look out the balcony and be like, are there any visitor spots? Because we had someone coming over, and then we'd be like, no, you have to park at Easterbrook across the road. And you could see it from the balcony. And so we could have similar problems like that. And but my
Through
point,
you, Mr. Mayor, I think we wanted to just confirm the developer said theirs will be assigned tandem spots, correct?
There we go. The developer has indicated to us that the tandem spaces will be assigned. Then that will leave, depending on how many tandem spaces are provided, that will leave either 6 or 7 additional spaces out of the 0.25 of the 1.25 to be available to be sold to whoever wants a second parking space.
And if I could just add, just from maybe an economic development lens and looking at planning more holistically, if a visitor's coming to visit and they actually park in a municipal lot or somewhere, they're passing by some of our businesses. So we increase the chances that they'll actually support one of our local businesses. The other thing, same with the restaurant, if this scenario did exist, although Alan said, our parking requirements are rather generous here, but if it did exist, on your way after a beautiful meal, you're walking to your parking spot, maybe you pop in for a coffee, an ice cream, you buy something from a local vendor. The more pedestrian traffic we can have in our downtown, the better it is for the survival and thriving of local businesses. So just keep that in mind. A step higher maybe than just the planning and that piece, to keep that in mind. How do we help make our local businesses successful for the long term? And pedestrian activity is really key to that. So if it was so easy for me to get in and out of my car, we actually reduce our chances of anybody spending any additional funds in our downtown, right? So we always like to look at things in a very balanced, holistic way.
So I don't want to make things so difficult on our residents that they have to shop here, right? It's like the new green bin garbage program that's going to come out. They make our garbage every other week collection so that it will stink so bad if you don't put your green bin out that you have to use the green bin. And yeah, that will reduce the amount going to the landfill and that will help the environment, right? But what we're doing is we're making it so terrible to keep your green garbage for 2 full weeks before you can dispose of it at the curb that you will. And so it's a way of manipulating our residents to do something through negative reinforcement. And what you're talking about there is something like that. So we say, since there's no visitor parking on site, you have to use parking off site. And while you're inconvenienced to park off site, you might, while you're walking here from the distance that you have to travel. So listen, at my house, I could say, hey, why don't you park downtown and ride your bike to my house? And then you could, it's like, my guests would say, no, thanks, I don't want to. I'll just park on the street by your house. And I'll say, yeah, well, that probably is the easiest way for you to come over for dinner. But then you can't have a coffee while you're like walking to the place where you have to park. And so it's called negative reinforcement, or it's like, and what I want is convenience. So I have, I don't know, a quarter of the town of Grimsby. I'm one of the largest wards, and these people who I represent want convenience, not like to be forced to walk past a coffee shop and then maybe spend money too.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't want to sort of overindulge this conversation because I think we've sort of gone on track. The parking is going to be fully compliant. It's more than generous, the 1.25, but encouraging people to walk promotes their health. So I do want to put that out there. We do want to look at that. It's not negative reinforcement, it's positive reinforcement. Everywhere you go, myself included, we're looking at our steps, how many steps we're taking, how active we are. Building walkability and pedestrian mobility into a city is really key for the health of our residents. I want to stress that it's not negative reinforcement, it's actually positive building in qualities of their life that not only can contribute to the business, but also really helps with health and public health officials. This is well documented, well studied. It really can help. Yeah. Just to clarify. Yeah. But I don't want to indulge the conversation because we're getting divergent from
So the thing
topic.
is that, would you buy a house that didn't have parking on site? Do you have parking at your house? I have parking at my house. Does any of us not have parking at our homes? Right? Do some of us have parking where guests can park at our house? If I was looking for a house on realtor.ca, like the number of parking spots, this is a thing that I'm looking for, right? And so sure, but I'm willing to pay for a gym membership. Like I'll pay extra to go to a place where I can do my exercise so that I don't have to walk a block to get home from my car. And I don't want to indulge this too because we're off topic, but it's parking close to the place where you live is a thing that people want, and forcing them to park further away from home, while it may be good for their health, it's not what they want.
I think we're fully compliant on the residential. So we're not talking about people from where they live. We're talking about potentially people visiting the restaurants, and if it's a really full night, we're not talking about the residential space. Again, we're fully compliant on the parking. So it's not that I won't have a parking space where I live. I think, again, we've sort of, misinterpreted some facts there.
This on different separate question. Mr. Ramsey said that some spaces may not choose to buy, or some units may not choose to buy a parking space, and others will be able to purchase those spaces. Will there be any units sold with no parking?
And again, I'm just basing my comment based on what we were told by the developer, and every developer in town or development in town has had a parking space assigned to a unit, minimum one parking space. So each parking space or each unit comes with at least one parking space. There will be some units that will be assigned the tandem spaces, and then there will be either 5 or 6, depending on what the final number is, maybe more, parking spaces that will be available for sale to whoever wants to buy an extra parking space.
So every unit will get at least one parking space, and 16 of them will get a tandem space, and there will be either 5 or 6 units that can have 2 parking spaces, and there'll be none that will have no parking. Because these are purchased, the first owner might not need a parking space at all, and then when they sell it, the second owner may require a parking space, and there just won't be, and we can't make parking appear after it's built.
And oftentimes, if you go on MLS, you'll see that there are parking spaces for sale also. So people that have purchased an extra parking space can sell their unit with a one space, and then if the person doesn't want it, then they can offer for sale the second parking space. So I often see that on the MLS also.
They could, but the timing might not work out to when the person is purchasing, and that might deter people from even moving to Grimsby, because there's not even a parking space. But I'd like to see that the units are not sold without a parking space. And as you mentioned, that all of the other developments in our town have always sold with at least one parking space assigned to each. And I would like to see through our site plan that the case on this would be that all units would have at least one parking space, even if they don't want a parking space, it's a part and package of the unit.
And if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, also through the condominium approval process, the parking spaces will also be parcelized like the units are. And through that process, you can force certain units to be tied to certain parking spaces.
One further question. If the parking spaces are parcelized, then those commercial parking spaces, how are they parcelized? And if the commercial units are sold and not rented, will those parking spaces belong to the commercial unit?
There will be a certain number of parking spaces that will be part of the common element, and those will be assigned to visitors, either to the visitors of the residential units or to the visitors of the commercial units. But they will be part of the common element, and they won't be parcelized.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vane?
A couple of points I just want to address very, very quickly. First of all, I have to commend Councillor Sharp. He was the one who got us to where we are today. He has met everything we've asked and then more. I think at this point, I think we're getting into areas that really aren't our domain or are going to be settled in other areas. I appreciate that. I, like everybody else, want to make sure we do what's best for our town and what's best for our residents. I know a few people have complained. I've also received a lot of positive emails. I know the Chamber of Commerce has approved this, supports this. I believe yourself and Councillor Frey can answer whether the DIA is in full support of this. I believe they are. The businesses want it. People want to move to downtown. One of the things, when I used to live in Vaughan, one of the things that people used to complain about is as they aged, they had nowhere to move to within Vaughan because everything was all single-family homes. They were begging for condos. What I think we're missing out on here is that first of all, I think we're getting into too many areas that aren't ours. We're getting into splitting hairs. Well, this parking space and that, and who can do that? And that's not really something that we should be into. We should be approving a good development that offers what our residents want and what our need. We're probably going to have some residents that are going to move in there that may rely solely on the new transit system that we have. And Councillor Sharp was a big proponent of that. He took it to the council meeting last time. I mean, these are things that we have to consider beyond it. And I think we're getting into the nitty-gritty. We're questioning our experts based on our personal feelings, and I think that's dangerous. But what I think is more dangerous, and that nobody has actually broached yet, if we do not approve this tonight, and the developer goes to Superior Court, and he finds that he has legal ownership of that laneway. Well, now we are out hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in legal fees and other fees that we put out for planners and everything else, potentially, and then the developer can do pretty much what he wants because LPAT, as we know, supports developers. The province wants increased populations. This development is a good one, and we've got to stop doing the nitty-gritty and trying to cloud the waters and all this type of thing, and we really have to give this one a shot. Because I think if we don't, we're going to be in a bad spot. And I had one gentleman today who I don't know if I'm repeating myself here or not, but he mentioned he'd been in town for 35 years, and he said he has never seen a single snowplow. He has never seen the town go in and fix a pothole on that laneway. I know that some members of council feel that we have a good argument, but the developer's lawyers are telling him he's got a good argument. So we're taking a 50-50 shot here. Are we willing to increase taxes 10% or more just to fight something based on principle because we don't like it or we have biases or whatever else? We have to get beyond our personal selves and look at this as a reasonable thing for the town. This is a good thing for the town. Our experts are telling us it's good. They are our experts. We merely make decisions based on what the experts should be telling us, and that's what we should be doing, not trying to personalize this. Thank you.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is only my second meeting about this project because I had in the past declared a conflict of interest, which I sought out legal counsel and found out that I'm not in conflict. So our last meeting, we had an issue with 10 parking spaces and too many units. It seems like we've resolved that, and it seems like some of us are still finding other reasons to either prolong this process or eventually it'll just go away. It seems to be that we want to continue to analyze this till it's not here anymore. This is a great opportunity for our town to see something of this magnitude in our downtown. It's going to create more pedestrian traffic. It's going to create more vitality for our merchants. They're going to be happier. We're hung up on the restaurant, and you can't argue with me about restaurants because I think I know more than anybody here about a restaurant. And if it's 1,000 square feet, I think it could be viable. You could get enough seating in 1,000 square feet that a restaurant, it could be a high-end restaurant that has a large kitchen with a lot of staff. We don't know all the particulars, but it is viable to have that restaurant with that square footage. And if somebody comes along and needs more, well, as we know, we'll have to have more parking. It's as simple as that. But we seem to be hung up on a lot of things, as Councillor Vane has indicated. I did also want to mention to Councillor Sharp about the tandem parking. If he had got an extra key cut for his wife's car, he could have moved it at night so when she got up in the morning, she could just leave without having him to come down and move his car. It would have been a quick solution to a simple problem. Tandem parking, people get used to it. It's not a perfect world. If tandem parking's there, somebody's going to make good use of it, and they'll figure it out themselves. And this is a great project. We've got to move it ahead now. We can't hang in here any longer. We've got to pass this.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we need a mover and seconder to receive Antonetta's report. Moved by Councillor Ritchie. Seconder, Councillor Sharp. Moved by Councillor Ritchie, second by Councillor Sharp. Resolved that the presentation in regards to PA 20-18 settlement agreement, official plan and zoning amendment application for 21 and 23 Main Street and 6 Doran Avenue, Laneway ownership be received. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Need a mover and seconder to move into closed session. Councillor Frake, Councillor Vardy. Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Vardy. Resolved that council meet in closed session regarding the following: Section 2392F of the Municipal Act 2001, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. PA 2018 settlement agreement, official plan, and zoning amendment applications for 21 and 23 Main Street East and 6 Doran Avenue, Laneway ownership revised. All in favor?
Yes.
That's carried. We're now in closed. Welcome back to the public. We're back into open session now. Sorry, thank you. Mover, Councillor Ritchie. Seconder, Councillor Cadwell. Moved by Councillor Ritchie, second by Councillor Cadwell. Resolved that confidential report PA 20-18 be received, and now therefore be it resolved that the town directs their legal counsel, Gowling WLG, to enter into the following agreements, including amending those agreements as may be required in the absence of Irene Braun's consent, and to continue to negotiate with Irene Braun to obtain her consent, failing which to obtain the court orders contemplated pursuant to the master settlement agreement and the court minutes of settlement. 1, a master settlement agreement. 2, court minutes of settlement. 3, Braun settlement agreement. 4, Alpat minutes of settlement. And that the town directs mayor and the clerk to enter in the following documents. Number 1, acknowledgement and direction with respect to the easements and land titles. Number 2, document general to register the court order vesting title to parts 1 and 2of the laneway in the town. And number 3, option agreement. And that the town directs the mayor to swear and sign the following documents: land transfer tax affidavit with respect to the option agreement, land transfer tax affidavit with respect to the easement and registry, land transfer tax affidavit with respect to vesting title to parts 1 and 2 of the laneway in the town.
Transfer record of both, please.
Yep.
Yeah. After this, yeah.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Sharp?
So I find that this is a difficult decision to make. This is the first building that's going to be the redevelopment of our downtown. And I feel that from the people I've been contacted by, and just my general feeling is that there's a lot of residents who are opposed to this. And I think that because of the restaurant, the way it's laid out, with only 1,000 square feet of front of house in a 3,000 square foot building, I think that that's done so that less parking is required. And I think that the parking that meets our zoning bylaw is not enough for the actual use of a restaurant. And for that reason, I'm going to vote this down. And I want people to be aware that that's why. And I think that if the developer had listened to what we were talking about, that he might have been, I'm really close, right? This is something that we want to see a building downtown on this lot. But this isn't one that I want. Thank you.
I think through you, Mr. Mayor, because we're an open, it's worth repeating that A, the developer will be fully compliant with our zoning bylaw. B, should the amount of restaurant sort of area for public use or eating increase, the parking will also have to increase. And also worthy of noting that the developer added one additional parking spot than even our requirements in the zoning bylaw. So I just wanted that to be out in the public record in the open portion of the meeting.
Thank you, Antoinette. Councillor Ritchie?
One of the hardest things when you run for politics is, a lot of decisions that you have to make. politicians are always considered to be very nearsighted because they're only thinking about the few years that they have in front of them. So they can only make decisions for those 4 years. And I agree with Councillor Sharp that, one of the things you want to do when you're making your decisions is you always, in my opinion, you should always be considering about the future and should always be looking at the future. But that being said, this decision in front of us, when we're talking about commercial space, the individual has the applicant has put forward their plans. And unfortunately with that, we have to make a decision with what those plans are in front of us. Is there potential of it getting bigger? Absolutely. But again, they're meeting the parking space requirements, and if it changes at the site plan, they will meet those requirements. And there's multiple factors with this building that could also change that as well. We talked about it before. The number of units is a maximum of 87. It could be less. If it's less, there's additional parking space, which then could potentially make that restaurant space bigger. So there's a lot of unknowns, and for those reasons, again, I do give credit to Councillor Sharp for encouraging this to go back, and further concessions were made. But again, I think this town really needs this development. I believe that there's been multiple planners who have said this is good planning. It increases, it will increase the vibrancy of our downtown. The business there are all in support of it. Chamber's in support of it. VIA's in support of it. Again, they speak to, what I understanding was they wanted to make sure that it complied with the parking. It does. And so I will be supporting this tonight. And I just wanted to make it clear that I will be supporting it as I think this is where we need to go with our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Any further
Mr.
questions?
Mayor, I'd like to speak.
Okay, Councillor Vane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I agree with multiple things said by multiple councillors tonight, member of City Council. I do respect Councillor Sharp for bringing this back. At the time, I kind of questioned whether it was a good move, but I do agree it was worthy coming back. We've now reached, and in some cases, I believe we may have even exceeded the requirements that we would normally have. There is a clause in there, or the bylaw, that will, if he should choose to enlarge the restaurant, he's going to have to increase parking. It's all there. We've got all the safety features there. I think at this point we need this. Our downtown businesses are dying. That's the one thing you can see from, following Facebook, which I no longer bother. But a lot of the comments I've received from a lot of people, both developers and residents, who want this. The town. There's people in this town, as I said earlier, there's people in this town who want to retire. They don't want to have a big home, and they need somewhere to retire. And it's the same as when I was living in another town where they had no condominiums, and people were begging them to put in condominiums so that people could retire in their own town. This is a perfect location. This building is beautiful. It matches the heritage features of the other buildings around. This developer has bent over backwards to accommodate us. I think at this point, if we're asked for any more, I think we're not being unreasonable. We've asked our planners, we've asked our lawyers to go out and get the best deal they could, and they did. And they worked hard. I think at this point, if we turn this down, in my opinion, and that's all it is my opinion, I think we're being, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, we're not dealing in good faith. I think we're really dealing in bad faith if we go back and say we want more again. It's like selling your house, and then the day of closing comes and you say, well, wait a second, hold on. You know what? The neighbor down the street sold his house for $2,000 more. You better give me $2,000 or I'm just going to walk away from the deal. Legally, you can't do all that stuff without penalties. But my point being is that we asked for the best deal. They put forward a great deal. They've met everything we've asked for. Every single planner that we've hired or that we have on staff has approved it or said this is a good deal. Our lawyers said this is a good deal. Potentially, we could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars if we take this to court, because even though we feel we have a good case, he feels he has a good case. We don't know the way the court's going to go. I'm not prepared to take $300,000 of taxpayers' money, which is a 3% tax increase, just to prove a point, just to say, yeah, we were right. At the end of the day, we need this development. We need the taxes, we need the space for the residents, and we need the business. We need to have this deal. As far as the restaurant, that we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. And you know what? There's a bylaw in place. If he increases the size of the restaurant, he has to increase the parking. End of discussion. So that's just my opinion on the matter, and I will be supporting this because I think it's a very good deal for the town. And it's got the support of the Chamber of Commerce. It's got a conditional support, I believe Councillor Frake said last week, of DIA. It's met all the parking requirements. And, you know, it's, as somebody said earlier, we're getting away from fossil fuel cars. We've just introduced a new transit system. A lot of the people that I feel, and I could be wrong, that will be purchasing some of these units will be older people who are retired, who may not be able to drive, who may retire, who may count on our new Niagara Region Transit, which we're all trying to promote. And I think that's the way we've got to be looking. I think if we continue to sit here and get hung up on the fact that we're going to have fossil fuel cars and we're not going to have enough spaces for them, we're being very short-sighted. And like Councillor Ritchie said, we've got to look beyond the 2 years. We've got to be different than other politicians. We've got to look 20, 30 years ahead. And we know 20, 30 years from now that fossil fuel cars are gone. And for the most part, transit is the way to go. This is the way planners develop cities these days, is with the intent to walk and move. We've got transit now. Let's just go ahead and give this approval. We can come back later and fine-tune it after site plan. We still have to approve it at that point. But at this point, let's stop trying to bog it down. Let's move on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yeah, just before, I have one comment, and I don't think I think it's new because no one else has spoke on it. I know we're under this hard August 31st, 2020 deadline. We're still arguably in a pandemic. We lost at least 3 months, probably 4 months. There's been no extension of this, yet we talked about tonight that the next extension is for the 2021. The extensions, we're talking about allowing them, and I just feel that some of the information that we've got in the 11th hour is just we're getting stuff last minute, and we're getting stuff where we have no ability to extend, and we lost at least 90 days, probably more, when we were in full-blown pandemic. And I just feel that I would rather see an extension, whether we defer it and we have to quickly recobble some of these negotiations that have gone this far. I really think that we owe this a little more time, and that's just my opinion. So I'll read the resolution, or I won't read the resolution again because it's quite long, unless council wants me to. I'm happy to.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Can we consider a referral back to staff and give us an extra week or two to discuss this with the developer, to see if he wants to have an extension? Because he may just say, to heck with it and go to court. And if he wins, we have nothing. We lose, $300,000 and we get nothing. But I'd like to see a referral if we're going to even consider that.
The clerk will put together a referral because you have Councillor Sharp seconding. Councillor Ritchie? I can speak to the referral. Is he allowed? Yeah.
Again, I think that we've got a very good deal in front of us. We've heard from our legal. I don't think it's, in my opinion, not that it matters much, I don't think it gets any better. I will not be supporting a referral. I think that the developer has a right to know what's happening. The public has a right to know how we're going to vote on this. As much as individuals have people that say this should not happen, there's a lot of people who say that this development needs to happen. There is, again, the Chamber, the Grimsby Benevolent, all the letters of support, the DIA, all have supported this. And whether we had an additional 30 days, 90 days to negotiate, I don't think the deal gets better. So I just want to let everyone know, I will not be supporting the referral. I'd like to see this go to a vote and for this to move forward.
Councillor Bothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Again, I'm just going to state that My thinking is that I like my I's dotted, my T's crossed, and I really think we started off this process actually even at LPAT and before LPAT to determine the ownership of the laneway. And that's I think 2 or 3 months, 6 more months till we get that determined, and then a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, it's just a different ballpark, and I'm more than welcome to have the developer come back and bring us that proposal as soon as that laneway is determined. So there's just too many unknowns, there's too much stuff in that agreement that just makes me uncomfortable with respect to the laneway, and I really feel that that laneway title has to be determined first. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I asked to call the question before any deferral or referral was put on the table.
Well, I think the fact it's on the table now, we'll vote on it. Any further discussion on the referral? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Vane, second by Councillor Sharp. Resolved that resolution in regards to PA 20-18 settlement agreement, official plan, and zoning amendment applications for 21 and 23 Main Street East and 6 Doran Avenue be referred back to staff. Recorded vote. Councillor Bothwell?
No.
Councillor Dunstall? Councillor Frake?
No.
Just for clarification, Councillor Bothwell was no, Councillor Dunstall was no, Councillor Frake was no. Councillor Cadwell?
No.
Councillor Ritchie?
No.
Councillor Sharp?
Yes.
Councillor Ritchie was no, Councillor Sharp was yes. Councillor Vane?
No.
Councillor Vardy?
No.
Councillor Vardy's no. And myself, I'm a yes, so that is defeated. All right, we're back to the original motion now. Moved by Councillor Ritchie, second by Councillor Cadwell. Whereas on August 17, 2020, Council resolved that confidential report PA 2017 be referred back to staff and negotiate the intentions as discussed and further directed to bring back a settlement, a special council meeting on August 22nd. Now be it resolved that confidential report PA 2018 be received, and now therefore be it resolved that the town directs their legal counsel, Gowling WLG, to enter into the following agreements, including amending those agreements as may be required in the absence of Irene Braun's consent, and to continue to negotiate with Irene Braun's to obtain her consent, failing which to obtain the court orders contemplated pursuant to the Master Settlement Agreement and the Court Minutes of Settlement. 1. Master Settlement Agreement. 2. Court Minutes of Settlement. 3. Braun Settlement Agreement. 4. LPAT Minutes of Settlement. And that the town directs the mayor and the clerk to enter in the following documents. 1. Acknowledgement and direction with respect to the easements and land titles. 2. Document general to register the court order vesting title to parts 1 and 2 of the laneway in the town, and 3, option agreement. And that the town directs the mayor to swear and sign the following documents. 1, land transfer tax affidavit with respect to the option agreement. 2, land transfer tax affidavit with respect to the easement and registry. And 3, land transfer tax affidavit with respect to vesting title to parts 1 and 2 of the laneway in the town. And it's a recorded vote. Councillor Bothwell?
No.
Councillor Bothwell is a no. Councillor Dunstall?
Yes.
Councillor Dunstall is a yes. Councillor Frake?
No.
Councillor Frake is a no. Councillor Cadwell?
Yes.
Councillor Cadwell is a yes. Councillor Ritchie?
Yes.
Councillor Ritchie is a yes. Councillor Sharp?
No.
Councillor Sharp is a no. Councillor Vane?
Yes.
Councillor Vane is a yes. Councillor Vardy?
No.
Councillor Vardy is a no, and myself, I'm a no, so that is defeated. Need a mover and seconder for the bylaws? Mover and a seconder for the bylaw? Councillor Bothwell, Councillor Vardy. Moved by Councillor Bothwell, second by Councillor Vardy, resolved that leave be given to introduce bylaw number 20-64 inclusive, and that be read, same be read a first time. All in favor? That's carried. Need a mover and seconder for second and third reading? Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Frake. Moved by Councillor Ritchie, second by Councillor Frake. Resolved that leave be given to introduce bylaw number 20-64 inclusive, read a first time, now be read a second and third time, and finally passed, and that the mayor and town clerk do sign and seal the same, and rule of council to the contrary notwithstanding. All in favor? That's carried. Meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone.